There is a country so narrow in places that a person standing on its central plains could look west to a wall of forested mountains and east to the sea in the same unbroken glance. It curls for nearly 2,000 miles along the edge of the South China Sea, shaped like a dragon's tail, held together on one side by the Truong Sun Range and on the other by tide and current. In its north, rice terraces climb the hills in staircases that catch the morning light like broken mirrors. In its south, a delta fed by the Mekong River, and its distributaries breathes in and out with the monsoon, never quite certain whether the rain is arriving or leaving. This is Vietnam. Seen from above, the country reads like two landscapes stitched together by a single spine of mountains. In the north, the Red River Delta unfurls in shades of jade and ochre around Hanoi, hemmed by limestone karsts that rise out of the earth like the vertebrae of some enormous sleeping animal. Farther south, the Central Highlands roll out in red soil plateaus, thick with coffee and rubber trees, before the land drops toward a coastline of nearly 2,000 miles, strung with fishing villages, white sand coves, and the improbable stone islands of Ha Long Bay. In the far south, the Mekong Delta dissolves into a labyrinth of canals and paddies so green they look almost lacquered, a patchwork visible even from a departing airplane window. It is a landscape of extremes, held together by rivers that carry silt down from mountains most of its people will never climb. But its true character lies not in the scenery, but in its people. Vietnam is a country perpetually caught between two clocks. One keeps the old time, of ancestor altars and lunar calendars, of rice planted by hand, and tea poured for a guest before a word is exchanged. The other keeps the new time, of factory shifts and fiber optic cables, of motorbikes weaving past glass towers that still smell faintly of wet concrete. Few countries have moved so far in one direction, while holding, with such quiet determination, onto the other. Behind that duality sits a history of repeated upheaval, decades of colonization, war, and division, followed by reunification in 1975 and a hard, patient climb back toward prosperity. This is the story of the quiet rhythm of life in Vietnam. The tempo of Vietnamese life has always answered first to water and heat. Two monsoon seasons divide the year into wet and dry, and for centuries that rhythm dictated when rice was sown, when fishing boats went out, when families gathered indoors to wait out a typhoon rolling in off the South China Sea. That rhythm has never fully disappeared, even as the country industrialized around it. Vietnam is now home to just over 102 million people, a population large enough to fill entire nations twice over, and yet the texture of daily life rarely feels anonymous. In a Hanoi alley or a Mekong hamlet, neighbors tend to know one another 3 generations deep, and a stranger is rarely a stranger for long. There is a particular Vietnamese patience, forged by a history of endurance through famine, French colonial rule, decades of war, and the long work of reconstruction that followed, that shows up not as slowness, but as steadiness, an unhurried insistence on doing things properly rather than quickly. It is a temperament visible in the North's cooler, 4-season climate around Hanoi, in the fierce tropical heat of the South around the Mekong, and in the narrow, storm-battered coastline of the center, 3 distinct climates producing 3 distinct regional characters within the same national skin, yet bound by the same underlying refusal to be rushed. The country wakes before the heat does. In Hanoi's Old Quarter, plastic stools appear on the sidewalk before 6 in the morning, arranged around a pot of beef broth that has simmered through the night with charred ginger, star anise, and cinnamon bark. An elderly woman ladles pho into chipped bowls, adds scallion and a squeeze of lime, and regulars slide onto stools without needing to order because she already knows. Farther south, in Ho Chi Minh City's District 4, motorbikes idle 3 deep outside a banh mi stall where the baguette, a legacy of French colonial bakeries adapted entirely into something Vietnamese, is split, buttered, and packed with pâté, pickled carrot, and coriander in under a minute. Somewhere in the crowd, someone calls out to a passing neighbor, "Ăn cơm chưa?" Literally, "Have you eaten rice yet?" A phrase so embedded in daily greeting that it functions less as a question about food than as a small, reflexive way of saying, "I see you, I hope you are well." The wet markets that open at dawn in every Vietnamese town are less an economic necessity than a social institution that happens to sell vegetables. Vendors selling morning glory, dragon fruit, and live catfish plucked from tanks know their regulars by name, by household size, by which grandmother prefers her greens without the stems. In Can Tho, in the heart of the Mekong Delta, the floating market at Kai Rung still opens before sunrise, boats hung with a single sample of whatever they're selling, a pineapple or a bundle of onions, tied to a pole so buyers can spot the right vessel from a distance without a single word exchanged. In Hanoi, Zhongshuan Market has stood in the old quarter since the French colonial period. Its stalls now passed down within families the way a farm or a workshop might be elsewhere, and a shopper's grandmother likely bought her own cloth from the same row of stands decades earlier. A tailor in Hoi An's ancient town might have measured 3 generations of the same family for Ao Dai, the fitted, high-collared national dress. Credit in these places is often informal, extended on trust, and settled at the end of the month, the kind of arrangement that survives only where reputation still counts for more than paperwork, where the barber, the fishmonger, and the noodle seller are neighbors first and merchants second. At the center of Vietnamese life sits the Gia Dinh, the family, understood not as a nuclear unit confined to one household, but as a lineage stretching backward through ancestors and forward through grandchildren not yet born. Most homes keep a small altar near the entrance or in the main room, where incense is lit for deceased relatives on the 1st and 15th of each lunar month. There is an old proverb, "Kak Jen na Kong Gati Vit," meaning a guest arrives, if not chicken, then duck, a saying that captures the near-obligatory generosity extended to anyone who crosses the threshold, invited or not. It remains common, particularly outside the largest cities, for 3 generations to share a single roof. Grandparents minding grandchildren while parents work, an arrangement born equally of economics and affection. In rural provinces, especially during the rice harvest, neighbors still practice Joy Kong, literally exchanging labor, a system in which families take turns, helping one another transplant seedlings or bring in the crop, repaid not in money but in future days of work, when the favor is needed in return. And on nearly every street corner, from Hanoi to Hue to Can Tho, sits the Quang Cha Pe Via He, the sidewalk coffee shop, its plastic stools facing outward toward the street rather than toward one another, functioning as the communal living room where news, gossip, and small business are all conducted over glasses of dark, sweetened coffee. A single table, sometimes hosting a retired school teacher, a motorbike taxi driver, and a university student, without any of them finding the arrangement unusual. Vietnamese, a tonal language once written for centuries in Chinese-derived characters before the Romanized Quoc Ngu script became dominant, remains the mother tongue of the vast majority of the population and is taught nationwide from primary school onward. Vietnam is also officially home to 54 recognized ethnic groups, and languages such as Tay, Muong, and Hmong are still spoken across the Northern Highlands, with Khmer spoken among Khmer Krom communities in the Mekong Delta and Cham still spoken by descendants of the ancient Champa Kingdom along the south-central coast. Some of these languages appear in local bilingual schooling, though many face gradual decline as younger generations migrate toward Kin-majority cities. Vietnam's oral tradition runs deep through Sie Dao, folk verses passed down through generations, often sung by mothers to children as lullabies long before those children can read. Quan Ho, the alternating call and response folk singing of Bac Ninh province, recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage, is still performed today at spring festivals, singers in traditional dress trading verses across a courtyard or from boats drifting on the Cao River. In pockets of the north, Si Tru, an older and more austere form of sung poetry accompanied by a three-stringed lute, survives through a small number of dedicated performers working to keep it from disappearing entirely. No holiday commands the country like Tet Nguyen Jan, the Lunar New Year, when highways empty of daily commuters and fill instead with families making the long journey home, sometimes the only journey home they make all year. Streets are strung with kumquat trees and branches of peach or apricot blossom, and on the eve of Tet, households gather to eat ban chung, a dense, square cake of glutinous rice, pork, and mung bean, wrapped in dong leaves and boiled for the better part of a day, a dish said to symbolize the earth itself. Alongside the holiday, the pastime of Jia Kao, a feathered shuttlecock kicked between players without ever touching the hands, fills courtyards and school playgrounds nationwide year-round. A simple game requiring nothing but quick feet and quicker reflexes, treasured as much for the camaraderie it builds as for the sport itself. Vovinam, a homegrown martial art founded in Hanoi in 1938 by Nguyen Loc, blends striking, grappling, and traditional weapons training, and is still taught in community clubs across the country as both self-defense and a point of quiet national pride, its practitioners performing at Tet festivals and national sporting events alike. For most of its history, Vietnam's economy has been built on what its land and water could produce. The Mekong Delta, often called the rice bowl of the nation, still produces roughly half the country's total rice output. Its paddies worked in patterns barely changed for centuries, even as the boats that carry the harvest have grown faster. Coastal provinces from Nha Trang to Phan Thiet have depended on fishing fleets for generations. Their wooden boats, painted in bright blues and reds, still visible at dawn along the shore. In the Central Highlands, around the city of Buon Ma Thuot, red volcanic soil has made Vietnam one of the world's largest coffee producers, its Robusta beans, trucked down to the port of Saigon for export. Outside Hanoi, the silk of Van Phuoc village has been woven on wooden looms for centuries, a craft older than the nation's current borders, while the potters of Bat Trang, working clay pulled from the banks of the Red River, have supplied ceramics to Vietnamese households since the 14th century. Then, in December 1986, the Communist Party launched Joy Moi, meaning renovation, a sweeping set of market reforms that opened a centrally planned economy, one where inflation had spiraled and store shelves stood empty to private enterprise and foreign investment. Within a generation, that policy helped transform Vietnam from one of the poorest nations in Asia into one of its fastest growing. Ho Chi Minh City, still called Saigon by many of its own residents, now anchors a financial and manufacturing corridor humming with electronics assembly, garment production, and footwear factories supplying global brands, its Cholon district still carrying the imprint of the ethnic Chinese merchants who built it into a commercial hub generations ago. Hanoi and the northern provinces of Bac Ninh and Thanh Nguyen have become a manufacturing base for companies like Samsung, whose Vietnamese plants now assemble a significant share of its global smartphone output. Meanwhile, Da Nang, once a wartime port city, has grown into a hub for software development and coastal tourism alike, and in Haiphong, the domestic conglomerate Vingroup now builds VinFast electric vehicles for both local roads and export markets, a symbol of a country no longer content merely to assemble what other nations design. It is, in effect, one nation holding two economies at once: rice paddies and semiconductor plants, separated by little more than a highway exit. Vietnamese cuisine carries the fingerprints of its history in every bowl. Pho, the beef or chicken noodle soup believed to have taken its modern form in the north, near Nam Dinh, in the early 20th century, remains the closest thing the country has to a national dish. Bun cha, grilled pork over rice noodles in a bowl of sweetened fish sauce, is a Hanoi specialty best eaten at a low wooden table, barely large enough to hold the plate. In the central city of Hue, once the seat of the Nguyen emperors, Bun Bo Hue simmers with lemongrass and chili oil into something spicier and more assertive than its northern cousins, a dish that still carries a trace of imperial kitchen ambition. And in Hanoi, Café Trung, egg coffee, whipped from egg yolk, condensed milk, and dark roast coffee into something closer to dessert than drink, has been served at the same cafe since the 1940s, a wartime improvisation born when fresh milk was scarce. Further south, Goi Quan, fresh spring rolls of shrimp, pork, herbs and rice vermicelli wrapped in translucent rice paper, remain a staple of home cooking, precisely because they require no stove at all, assembled at the table by whoever is hungriest. At home, the daily ritual of pouring sa phi sua ja, dark drip coffee sweetened with condensed milk over ice, remains as much about the quarter hour of stillness it demands, watching the coffee fall drop by drop through a small metal filter, as about the drink itself, and no guest leaves a Vietnamese home without being offered a cup of green tea, poured before any conversation of substance begins. For all the sleek coffee chains rising in city centers, the truest version of Vietnamese food is still the one made at a home stove, in a kitchen where a grandmother decides how much fish sauce is enough by smell, rather than by measurement. Away from its cities, Vietnam's geography swings between the theatrical and the serene. Ha Long Bay's nearly 2,000 limestone islands rise from emerald water like a landscape lifted from ink painting, a UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1994. In central Vietnam, Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park hides some of the largest cave systems on Earth beneath forested karst mountains, home to Son Jong, a single cavern large enough to contain a jungle and its own weather system. Farther north, in the highlands around Sapa, the terraced rice fields carved into mountainsides by generations of Hmong and Dao farmers form staircases of green and gold that shift color with the season, overlooked by Phan Xipang, the highest peak in Indochina. Along the southern coast, the granite islands of Cat Ba and the seagrass shallows of Con Jau host some of the last remaining coral reefs and turtle nesting grounds in the country's waters. Trekking through these terraces, a pastime that has grown alongside a new generation's appetite for the outdoors, offers a view of a landscape literally built by hand, one narrow field wall at a time, over centuries. Those terraces, patient, stacked, and still producing after hundreds of years, stand as the country's clearest symbol of resilience, proof of what is possible when a people refuse to let difficult land defeat them, choosing instead to reshape it, one season at a time. Highway 1A, part of the wider Asian highway network, now runs the length of the country, carrying freight trucks and long-distance buses past rice paddies at speeds unimaginable a generation ago, while new expressways continue to shrink journeys that once took days into a matter of hours. The Reunification Express still rattles along the coastal line between Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, a slower, more scenic alternative favored by travelers with time to spare and a fondness for open windows, even as both cities have begun opening their first metro lines to ease the crush of an estimated tens of millions of motorbikes now registered nationwide. Off the highways in mountain provinces like Hejiang, roads narrow into single-lane switchbacks where motorbikes remain the primary form of transport, loaded with everything from school children to sacks of rice to entire families of four, and it is still customary, on quieter rural roads, for drivers passing one another to raise a hand in greeting, a small courtesy nearly extinct on the country's busier national routes. Modern convenience and rural simplicity exist within the same short drive, sometimes within the same afternoon. Every year, hundreds of thousands of young people leave provinces like Nghaian, Thanh Hoa, and communities across the Mekong Delta for university lecture halls and factory floors in Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, and Da Nang, drawn by wages and opportunities their home communes cannot offer. Many send remittances home each month, quietly supporting parents and younger siblings still in the village. What pulls them back, at least for a few days a year, is rarely abstract. A local football match played each Tet against a rival commune, a grandmother's death anniversary observed with the whole family present, a wedding no one is permitted to miss. The tension is real and largely unresolved between the undeniable pull of opportunity in the cities and the quiet worry shared by many rural elders that villages emptied of their young will eventually lose the people needed to sustain them. Some return for good once they have saved enough, opening a small shop or workshop in their home district. Others stay in the cities permanently, sending money home each Tet in place of themselves, a compromise that keeps the family fed but leaves an empty seat at the table. By day, the country is defined by labor. Farmers bent over paddies in conical non-la hats, fishers hauling nets before the sun climbs too high to work comfortably, office workers filing into the glass towers of Landmark 81 or the Bitexco Financial Tower with laptop bags slung over their shoulders. But as the heat breaks in the evening, something in the country visibly exhales. Streets fill with families walking after dinner, elderly men playing Chinese chess at plastic tables under street lamps, teenagers gathered around bubble tea stalls, and the specific evening ritual of Nhao, an informal gathering over cheap beer and grilled snacks, unfolding on sidewalks nationwide as the day's hierarchies briefly dissolve between colleagues and strangers alike. There is a word to literally warm nest, that Vietnamese use for home, capturing precisely that feeling of stepping in from the dusk into something small, familiar, and safe. None of this exists without friction. Housing costs in Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi have climbed faster than wages for the young professionals crowding into their outer districts, and rural depopulation has left some northern and central provinces increasingly composed of only the very old and the very young. Tourism, a genuine economic lifeline for towns like Hoi An and Sapa, has also strained the very landscapes and traditions that first drew visitors there, raising uncomfortable questions about how much of a place can be shared before it stops being itself. What happens to a fishing village when its harbor becomes a photo backdrop rather than a livelihood? What does a centuries-old terraced hillside owe to the farmers who shaped it versus the visitors who now climb it for a sunrise photograph? And can a country modernize at the pace Vietnam has managed without loosening its grip on the customs that made it recognizable to itself in the first place? There remains, too, a real and lingering disparity between the wealth concentrated in the two major metropolises and the slower recovering provinces of the Central Coast and the Northern Mountains, a gap no amount of new highway construction has fully closed, and along the Mekong Delta, where so much of the nation's rice has always grown, rising sea levels and saltwater intrusion now creep further inland each year, threatening the very paddies that gave the region its name as the country's rice bowl. And still, after all of it, people stay. They stay for the smell of incense drifting from a family altar at dusk. They stay for a bowl of pho eaten on a plastic stool beside a neighbor who has known them since childhood. They stay for the particular safety of A to Am, a warm nest waiting at the end of every working day. They stay for land shaped by their grandparents' hands, for rivers that still carry the silt of mountains they will likely never climb, for a language that lets them ask, with real tenderness, whether someone has eaten yet. Somewhere along that narrow, dragon-tailed coast, hemmed by the same mountain wall that has shaped it for 1,000 years, between limestone islands and a delta green with rice, a country continues to prove that progress and tradition are not opposites to choose between, but two currents of the same river. Vietnam does not ask to be understood quickly. It asks only to be lived in slowly, the way its own people have always lived in it. If this is the kind of story that stays with you, the quiet, unglamorous truth of how people actually live, there are more places waiting to be told this way. Subscribe and let this be the beginning of a longer journey, one country and one ordinary morning at a time.